Harris is someone who's been a riser for me from my summer scouting series, but I just can't be fully in on him. Bond went to Texas to be the team's number 1 receiver and unlock Ewers' potential by giving him another deep threat after where they left for the NFL. Unfortunately, Bond leaving Alabama has looked like a mistake. I think it's a very serious accusation to say it about a player, and I'm not accusing Stewart of this being the cause for this lack of consistency, but something I will be trying to see if this inconsistency in production is effort related. Hey y'all, and welcome to the next part of my mid-season scouting series. This time we'll be going through my top 15 2025 receivers with some honorable mentions. Similar to my quarterback and running back rankings, which, by the way, shameless plug, you can check out by clicking on the link to the playlist that should be on the screen now. These aren't as adept as my final rankings. They'll be released soon before the NFL draft, but I do have comps for the top 5 again. Now, let's get to the receivers and let's start with some honorable mentions. Starting with the first honorable mention, Jack Bech from TCU. Bech has been a very productive player this season and at least has some good production in the past, having a good redshirt freshman year at LSU and now putting up numbers at TCU. He just seems like a type of player that likely won't work in the NFL. He's not overly quick and fast and often has to win by breaking tackles in the open field against smaller secondary players. Players can get away with that in college, but that usually doesn't work in the NFL as a good game plan to be able to win. The next honorable mention, and the most productive receiver on this list, Nick Nash from San Jose State. Nash has been putting up some bonkers numbers and will be this year's small school prospect who raises a lot of eyebrows when people check their stats. While Nash has shown some good promise against tougher opponents like Washington State and now Oregon State, he still feels like he's overall benefiting from being a volume hog against lesser competition. On top of that, he's an older prospect, and I'm just not sure he has the burst to get consistent separation at the next level. I would expect that he'll likely get a Senior Bowl invite if nothing else because of the season he's been having, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he performs there if he does get that invite, as that could determine if he does get drafted in the NFL. Another honorable mention I want to highlight is Tez Johnson from Oregon. Johnson has had another strong statistical year, and despite seemingly running more routes downfield, he's actually seen a decrease in his ADOT compared to last year. I mentioned this in my summer scouting since I was lower on Johnson compared to consensus, but he's just another player that typically doesn't succeed in the NFL. He's just really thin like a toothpick and is more of a gadget player than a true receiver. If he does go to a creative offensive coordinator, he could be interesting, but more than likely he'll either be misused or just not overly effective in the NFL. So we covered a few honorable mentions that's obvious I'm probably out on, but let's get to some players that actually have a fair amount of optimism in. Starting with Kaden Prather from Maryland. While his teammate Ty Felton, who, trust me, we'll get into him later, has been enjoying a breakout year, I first want to talk about Prather. Prather interested me in my summer scouting thanks to showing a lot of potential and improvement from the previous year. He's still definitely a raw player who will need some time to develop, but he's an explosive player with some nice route running fundamentals that offer a good ceiling. He also made some improvements in his hands, which I don't like to get into assumptions, but it does seem like he does show a good work ethic that could translate to the NFL. He may decide to return to school for another year now that Felton has overshadowed him, but he could be someone to keep an eye on if he continues his current trajectory. For my final honorable mention, I have someone that probably will only be on my list, but I have Elijhah Badger from Florida. I swear Elijhah Badger is cursed when it comes to getting competent quarterback play. He barely got playing time in his freshman year when Jayden Daniels was still there at Arizona State, but then was stuck with pretty lackluster quarterback play for his next 2 seasons. Then he transferred to Florida for this season and developed some great chemistry with Graham Mertz, but now Mertz is out for the year. It just seems like there's a lot of bad luck for him, but I do really think Badger's a quality player. He's a fluid athlete with good hands and a good release package. I won't pretend like he's a perfect under-the-radar type of player because he should still find a way to produce regardless of who his quarterback is, but I think he has some really nice potential if given the opportunity. Unfortunately, with him not being able to prove as much as I would have liked this year, and likely at risk of not being drafted, I have to keep Badger as just an honorable mention. But I'm still out there holding out hope in case something does pan out for him. Alright, now getting to the actual rankings. At number 15, I have Antonio Williams from Clemson. There are a number of people who are bigger fans of Williams than me, and I can understand why. He has quick feet, good ball tracking skills, and tough hands. To me, I just can't get that excited since I still view him as a player who's a bit too raw to overcome some possible athletic limitations. While Williams has quick feet which help him with his release, he doesn't use the hand enough which creates some early separation issues. Getting separation in general can also be iffy for him, and that was very apparent against Georgia when he lined up against better athletes, since he just seems to be lacking the burst to create separation on his cuts. Also, he's been dealing with a fair amount of drops, which need to be cleaned up as well. Overall, I think he's a fine player, but not someone that I would expect to be that impactful at this time, and it may be in his best interest to return to school for another year. Next, number 14, we have Kaden Prather's teammate, Felton from Maryland. As I mentioned in Prather's section, Felton's been enjoying a great breakout campaign and has been a leading force for the Maryland offense. He's been great after the catch and has shown some good fundamentals as a route runner, like working himself into the blind spot of the corner before making his cut and knowing how to win leverage on his routes. While those have been great to see, he seems to be running a pretty limited route tree, what makes it a bit worrisome to project to the NFL. Also, though I've fallen for plenty of thin frame receivers in the past, Felton's 6'2", 181-pound frame makes it hard to project him being successful in the NFL. A lot of those receivers with smaller frames have issues finishing catches through hits, and that has been an issue for Felton this year. I think Felton could be a nice complementary player for an offense, but I don't see him as a future sleeper stud like many are hoping for. Another player who I think a lot of people are projecting as a sleeper stud is my 13th ranked receiver, Ricky White III from UNLV. White has been very productive this year and is one of the most dangerous yak receivers in this class. He's an extremely fluid athlete who can change direction on a dime, which helps him pick up good chunk yards with the ball in his hands, and also gives him some good potential as a route runner. In addition to that, he also has tough hands, good ball tracking skills, and does a good job working back to the ball, and also even improved his release footwork to make him more than just a yak receiver. What keeps him this low on this list, other than the lower level of competition he routinely faces, is the fact that a fair amount of that production comes on shorter routes where he can make things happen after the catch instead of winning with his route running. Which, credit to him for being able to pick up those yards the way he has, but that isn't always translatable to the NFL. Also, he really struggles with more physical coverage, which with his leaner frame, that'll likely be an issue in the NFL. I'd also like to see him work to not be as reliant on body catches as well, because when he does catch the ball away from his body, he looks good, but he just doesn't do it routinely enough. Finally, there are some very serious off-the-field stuff that NFL teams will need to investigate with him, and it could take him completely off some teams' boards. However, a team does take a chance on him, he could become an interesting project for a team. Next, at number 12, I have Kyren Lacy from LSU. Lacy is someone who I should have given more credit to in my summer scouting, as he's been putting it together an impressive year. He's been running some good routes and showing off his tough hands that make him such a reliable receiver. My biggest concern about Lacy is just how much burst and athleticism he has to get separation in the NFL. He already struggles to get separation in college against better athletes, and I'm afraid that issue will be compounded in the NFL. Also, while he does have tough hands to finish catches through contact with the limited separation he can generate, he does still have lapses where his hands are too slow to go to the ball, causing him to have some drops. On top of all that, he's also an older prospect, which makes me a bit nervous to have him higher. That being said, I did want to give him credit for a quality year he's been having, and while I don't see him as a number 1 or even a number 2 receiver for an NFL team, he could be a really solid contributor, similar to someone like Van Jefferson, which I know isn't exactly an exciting projection, but teams keep signing Jefferson, so clearly he's useful in the NFL. Next, at number 11, I have Trey Harris from Ole Miss. Harris is someone who's been a riser for me from my summer scouting series, but I just can't be fully in on him. He has still looked good attacking the ball and has good ball tracking skills to make himself project as a good 50-50 ball winner, but what scares me is his separation still. Despite the great stats he's putting up, he's still struggling to get consistent separation on his own and still runs a pretty limited route tree. Just as I mentioned in my quarterback rankings video about my concerns with the Ole Miss offense for Jackson Dart, Ole Miss's offense makes things easier for receivers, and Jordan Watkins' sudden emergence should paint a cautionary tale for Harris. Even if you do want to go back a few seasons as well, we've seen this with Jonathan Mingo and Dontarian Drummond propped up by the offense, but failed to make an impact in the NFL so far. The receivers usually have an easier time getting open thanks to taking advantage of undisciplined college defenses with a high rates of play action and good route concepts. When receivers actually have to fend for themselves, it doesn't always lead to success, and that gets exposed in the NFL. Right now, I think he's more of a 50-50 ball winner than a true receiver, but if he cleans up his release and gets better at winning leverage, he could really unlock his potential as a great red zone threat. Now, getting to the top 10, at number 10, the player that I honestly had the most difficult time deciding where I wanted to rank him, Isaiah Bond from Texas. Bond went to Texas to be the team's number 1 receiver and unlock Ewers' potential by giving him another deep threat after where they left for the NFL. Unfortunately, Bond leaving Alabama has looked like a mistake. He struggled to connect with Ewers since Ewers is sticking to his tendencies to throw underneath and not take shots downfield. That is the part that makes it really difficult to evaluate Bond, since he thrives on deep opportunities but just hasn't had many this year. I'm also just someone that's a little bit lower on smaller vertical type of receivers, since I think they're kind of one-trick ponies and don't always hold up in the NFL against press to be a viable deep option, and often struggle to finish catches through contact. Those have been both issues I've seen already from Bond in college, and he also just relies on outrunning his defender instead of winning with nuance, and doesn't still seem to have a good understanding of how to win leverage. I still have Bond at number 10 since he still can fit a role in the NFL, despite how niche it may be, but I just can't bring myself to bring him much higher than some of the other receivers on this list. Next, number 9, we have Xavier Restrepo from Miami. Restrepo's been enjoying a great season thanks to being paired with likely Heisman finalist Cam Ward. He's become Ward's favorite target for a good reason. He's a quality route runner with reliable hands, and knows how to find openings against zone when things break down and Ward improvises. What keeps Restrepo lower on this list despite having a great year is being bound to the slot. At the time of recording this video, he's played 90.5% of his snaps from the slot this season, and has played 91.8% of his career snaps there. That's a pretty high mark, and makes it pretty clear that he's going to be a slot-only player in the NFL. That type of positional limitation can be concerning, and makes it a bit more difficult to expect a team to be able to go after him if they already have a great slot receiver, or love to run 22 or 2 tight end personnel. Plus, he just doesn't look like an overly dynamic athlete, which may limit his ceiling. There's a lot of Cole Beasley to his game who did have a good career, but there are also a lot of players like Beasley who didn't pan out or didn't do much that were in less ideal situations. And there's just no guarantee what type of situation Restrepo will go to. Next, number 8, we have Jayden Higgins at Iowa State. I was a big fan of Higgins during my summer scouting, and I was surprised how overlooked he was going into the season. What really drew me to Higgins is his inside-out potential. He primarily operates out wide, but he actually shows some good ability from the slot, which adds some interesting versatility. He has agile feet with good hip sync and tempo to his routes, which create deception, which isn't normal for a player his size. He also has really reliable hands and has proven himself as a red zone threat and a good jump ball winner. In a way, he's kind of a discount version of Tetairoa McMillan. What makes him a discount version of McMillan, though, is his potentially limited upside. While he could become a number 2 for an offense, I don't see him as a number 1 receiver. He provides very little after the catch and can really struggle to clear contact in his release, which can cause some inconsistent separation. He also runs a limited route tree with a lot of short hitches and slants, and has a tendency to round his cuts. As I mentioned, I like the versatility and he could become a quality player, but I don't see enough upside to have him higher on this list. So I talked a lot about upside, and now we're getting some receivers with some serious number 1 receiver upside, starting with my 7th ranked receiver, Evan Stewart from Oregon. What gives Stewart a lot more upside than a lot of the other receivers that I talked about is his burst and fluid movement skills. He's just such a smooth operator when he's moving on his routes at times, and it just shows a lot of potential of him becoming a great route runner in the future. I think he's a lesser player than him, but the way Stewart moves is very similar to Zay Flowers, who can use those movement skills to create separation in the NFL. Stewart could do that in the NFL and should be doing that routinely in college, but his production has been very inconsistent. To be honest, I need to do a deeper dive to see if this is due to scheme or what's going on, but this was an issue for him at Texas A&M as well. I think it's a very serious accusation to say it about a player, and I'm not accusing Stewart of this being the cause for this lack of consistency, but something I will be trying to see if this inconsistency in production is effort related. He's a very different receiver than him, but A.T. Perry was a player I was very bullish on due to him having great traits, but he struggled to give consistent effort and had other maturity issues, which now has him looking like he's on his way out of the NFL. Again, I'm not saying that is the issue with Stewart, but it would make sense. Regardless, Stewart has a ton of potential and hopefully he can showcase that during a hopeful playoff run. Next, number 6, we have my favorite sleeper, Jalen Royals from Utah State. If you haven't watched Royals, don't worry because I don't think too many people have based on either being extremely low in their rankings on him or just not having him in their rankings at all. To catch you up, he's one of the best route runners in the class despite being at Utah State. On top of that, he has elite athleticism, reportedly running a low 4.3 40 and having explosive jumping numbers. Also, he has great hands and does a great job attacking the ball and finishes catches through contact. Unfortunately, Utah State's passing game is very poor, and they've had a difficult time getting the ball to Royals, even when he does get himself open. Also, he'll be missing the rest of the season due to a foot injury, which robbed him of an opportunity to play against a quality Washington State team on national television to be able to prove his value. The good news is that he should be healthy for all the pre-draft process from what I saw, so I'm hoping he gets a Senior Bowl invite to be able to prove himself. If he does, he might be the next receiver who becomes a big riser after a strong Senior Bowl. Getting to my top 5, at number 5, I have Elic Ayomanor from Stanford. Ayomanor is somewhat in a similar boat as Royals, as he had to endure some really rough quarterback play. When the team has gotten the ball, he's looked great. But there's just too many times when he's basically running cardio due to running deep patterns that his quarterback either can't complete or just doesn't have the time to complete with Stanford's porous offensive line. I'll be very interested to see what the NFL thinks of Ayomanor, since he has a lot of great traits that should translate, including great speed, good route running, good release skills, and great hands. I did have him higher originally in my summer scouting, projecting that he would get more burst for more consistent separation, but that just hasn't been the case, and it doesn't seem much better than last year, which has been disappointing to see. Either way, he looks like a capable receiver who can become a number 2 receiver for a team, and maybe even a top receiver for a team if he develops further. Since we're now in the top 5, I'll also have comps for the players, and my comp for Ayomanor is Michael Crabtree. Like Crabtree, Ayomanor has great hands with good size and range to give himself a good catch radius. Also, both have great straight line speed and good route running fundamentals, but both can sometimes be iffy at separating and aren't overly productive after the catch. Also, both could potentially develop into top receivers for a team, but are probably closer to being receiver 2s for teams. While Ayomanor may not be a potential top receiver for a team like I was hoping for, I do think he'll be a quality addition to an NFL team. Next, number 4, I have Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. The best way to describe Egbuka is solid. He has solid hands, solid route running, hell, he even has a solid frame with the way he can break tackles. What keeps him at number 4 in my rankings is his likely limited upside that Egbuka has. Like Restrepo, Egbuka has played the majority of his snaps from the slot and has played nearly 80% of his snaps there this season. Also, while he is a quality route runner, he's often limited underneath routes, which is partly due to playing from the slot, but also due to Egbuka struggling to get consistent separation downfield. While he can become a really good slot player for an NFL team and provide something after the catch, I just don't know how many NFL teams are looking for that, which could impact how high he's taken in an NFL draft. I think whichever team does take him, they'll get a good contributor, but I just don't know if he'll be a clear-cut receiver 1 for a team. They're both having a tendency to win underneath while struggling to win downfield, primarily playing from the slot, both having great hands, and being tough after the catch. I have Khalil Shakir as Egbuka's comp. Like Shakir, Egbuka could become a quarterback's best friend, becoming a reliable target, and always knowing how to find an opening when things break down. Like Shakir, he may not have that high of a ceiling, but a team won't regret drafting him, and he'll be a big part of an offense. Getting to number 3, I have Luther Burden III from Missouri. Burden is likely going to be all over the place for people's rankings, but I still feel confident about having him as a 3rd ranked receiver. He still has some of the best twitch and burst in the class, and is the best yak receiver in the class. Also, he has great ball tracking skills, which he can use to finish back shoulder catches, even if his quarterbacks aren't always able to get him the ball that deep too frequently this season. Now, I do understand people's concerns with him having a down year statistically and primarily playing from the slot the past 2 seasons, but I think it's very easy to see that the quarterback play is causing his worst statistics, and Burden looked really good from the outside as a true freshman in the SEC, so I'm personally not overly concerned about those aspects. And I will admit that he still needs to develop some nuance in his route running and learn how to win leverage against his defender, but he has a ton of receiver 1 traits for an NFL team that knows how to develop receivers to get him over that hump. Due to both having elite receiver traits but still needing time to develop to be complete receivers, I have Brandon Aiyuk as Burden's comp. If you're just imagining the current version of Brandon Aiyuk, that comp might be very confusing, but I can see Burden having a very similar career as Aiyuk. Aiyuk entered the league as a project whose biggest areas of improvements were expanding his route tree and being more of a yak player. Sounds familiar, right? What's also familiar is Aiyuk having some good fundamentals and elite burst and twitch like Burden has. If Burden goes to a place that knows how to develop receivers like Aiyuk did, he could be a really nice top receiver for a team in the future if he develops appropriately. Next, number 2, I have Travis Hunter from Colorado. Hunter is a really difficult player to project and rank because so much is dependent on which position he actually plays in the NFL and how he develops once he can focus on just one position. I said it before, but I do think that he's a better cornerback, but with the contracts that receivers are getting and the longevity of the position, I see him committing to being a receiver at the next level. His great production at receiver this year is also making a good case for him to stick at receiver. He's been one of the most productive receivers in college this season and continues to impress with athleticism and hands. Something that I've also been happy to see is that he's playing nearly every single snap outside, which proves his release skills that he showed last year have held up with him continuing to produce on the outside. He is still a very limited route runner, but I do still have hope that he can use athleticism to develop his route running. If you even just take him as he is now, you have an ultra-athletic receiver who is potentially the best out of any receiver in this class at attacking the ball, giving him good potential underneath and in the red zone. He'll likely be a bit of a project in his first year, but don't be surprised if he hits the ground running with the way he seems to pick up things very quickly. Due to both being ultra-athletic receivers and both being great at attacking the ball, I have a lofty comp of Garrett Wilson as Hunter's comp. Now I say this as a lofty comp because I have a hard time seeing Hunter being at Wilson's level when he enters the NFL at receiver. That being said, I also didn't see Wilson having such a great start to his career since I expected some growing pains as he had developed as a route runner. With prospects, it's important to consider projection and future developments the players have in the offseason. If Hunter does this, I do think he can become an impactful player as Wilson was in his rookie year, and it may not happen as quickly, but I absolutely think he has everything that it takes to get there. Finally, at number 1, I have Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona. McMillan was a favorite of mine this preseason, and I went back and forth having him as my top receiver, and now I'm kicking myself for not just taking that plunge. He's such a smooth mover for someone his size, with serious inside-outside potential, and efficient cuts with explosion behind his cuts to create immediate separation. His release is still iffy as he can separate to clear contact, but that inside-outside potential gives him some leeway to work on developing his release while he wins inside. Also, he will need some time to further expand his route tree, as it still seems to be a bit limited with a lot of his production being boosted by crossers, but I do think he's capable of running a full route tree since he's shown some really good fundamentals as I mentioned with his cuts, and also has some really great hip sync that is rare for a player his size. I do have to bring up that I don't think he's a true 6'5 player though. I think he looked closer to 6'3.5", maybe 6'4 to me, which honestly might work better in his favor as that makes him a bit easier to find a player with comparable builds and just makes him easier to project to the NFL. I also do want to bring up that I absolutely do not see the Mike Evans comp for McMillan. It's not a slight against McMillan, but Evans is an animal who is strong at his size that can plow through coverage and burn players deep with his speed. The only player who's close to the player that Evans is in the past few years is DK Metcalf, who is also a lot stronger than McMillan. I think a much more appropriate comp for McMillan is Drake London. Like London, McMillan wins in a lot of the intermediate area of the field and has great route running fundamentals and hip sync that are rare for players his size. Both also ran limited route trees in college, but showed the potential to do more in the NFL. London also showed some good inside-outside versatility as he played his first 2 college seasons inside, then moved outside. Like London, I think McMillan will go on to have a very good NFL career and should be up for whatever an NFL team asks of him. And that concludes the receivers. While it doesn't look like that exciting of a class, there are still definitely some really promising players who should be solid contributors for NFL teams. Let me know in the comments if there are any players that you think I'm too high on, or players that you think that should be higher. With receivers always being hard to keep up with, let me know if there's anyone that also impressed you that didn't make the list. I'm hoping to finish out my midseason ranking series with my top tight ends later this week, so be sure to keep track, and to make sure that you don't miss any future rankings, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the video too, as it'll help the channel and this community. Also, as usual, if you want just a written form of the basics of the rankings, you can again subscribe to my Substack. But thank you all, and see you all next time.